Welcome to Lewis Spotlight. I'm Dr. Christy Billups. I am an assistant professor of theology here at Lewis University. I direct the pastoral ministry program in the theology department, and I direct the service learning program here. I'm going to be sharing parts of my story with you today and some of the life lessons that I've learned from them. I am originally from Massachusetts. I lived most of my life in Massachusetts and then went to college in Vermont. I grew up in a mostly middle-class white family in suburban, rural, just outside of Boston. We had horses, we were a Catholic family. I did well in school. I had some advantages. It was relatively smooth going. I was the youngest of 5 and was very close to my mom growing up. And she guided me in a lot of ways. Well, I mentioned my mom because when I was in high school, I started playing guitar, and at that time in the Catholic Church, playing guitar in church became the thing. And so my mom encouraged me to play guitar with my church folk group. And I was 16. I was not necessarily all down with that, but she convinced me that was a good thing to do. And it ended up, forming some of the choices I made in my life. When I went to college, I started as a music major, but then halfway through, because I was doing all my music in church, I started realizing that my faith life through retreats and other experiences was becoming more important, and then the music became, ironically, the instrument to be more involved with ministry early on. So I changed my major, and that has made a huge difference in where my life direction went. Yeah, ministry's been a common thread through the whole thing, but I've done a lot of different kinds of ministry. So right out of college, I did youth ministry and religious education for a church in Minnesota. And then I joined the Claretian Volunteers in my mid-20s and spent a couple years, and that's how I got to Chicago. They asked me to serve here, and so I was in a really large parish, did all sorts of different kinds of ministries, decided I loved teaching, went back for a master's in teaching, and I was already teaching for a while in the Pilsen neighborhood on the near south side of Chicago when I bumped into a seminarian friend who was doing his ministry inside the Cook County Juvenile Temporary Detention Center, which is commonly known as the Audi Home. And he bumped into me and he said, you should come in once in a while, I put that in quotation marks, once in a while to do music at the Mass inside the Audi Home. And so I was immediately attracted to doing that. I said, I would love that. I would be happy to do it. I remember August 1st, 1992, I brought my guitar inside the Audi Home for the first time, and I knew that I needed to keep going there. So I spent 16 years volunteering inside the Audi Home. I went once, twice, 3 times a week, depending on what was going on. Music was a part of it, but eventually it became important to me to be present to the young people inside the Audi Home, to hear their stories, to learn from them, to eventually recognize the face of Jesus in their faces. And it's become one of the most formative experiences of my life. All during that time, that was all volunteer. All during that time, I was a high school campus minister. I taught theology in a high school. So that was going on underneath, but this was really playing a very dominant role in helping me to learn how to pray with other people and helping me to recognize some of the injustices in the system that get people caught in the cycle of incarceration. I guess for me, recognizing the inherent dignity in every single person, as I shared very briefly about my own life, it wasn't idyllic by any means, but it was relatively easy. I didn't have to worry about clothing or food or shelter or stability in my home or things like that. And And when I encountered people who had all sorts of challenges that they faced day after day, it woke me up, to a broader spectrum of experiences with life and opportunities that people have. I had two highly educated parents, so education was both a gift and something that I did relatively well, and so it was easy. I run into kids that have less educated parents, parents that have to work constantly, 2-3 jobs to try to keep food on the table, and can't help them with their homework. Just the kind of litany of things that made their realities so different from mine and helped me not to take for granted the advantages and opportunities that I had and privileges that I had that maybe they didn't. And I think faith-wise, it's really important to me, the parts of the gospel that talk about Jesus' primary ministries were to the poor, to people that were constantly kept out of the rest of the community, the lepers, the women, people who weren't in the mainstream culture and community. And so then places like jail or prison are exactly where I need to be. Walking with people on the margins and recognizing the goodness in them. Well, there was a young man who I met in the mid-90s, not long after I'd been doing the ministry, and his name was Neco, that was his nickname. And I just found him to be a very compassionate, kind of amazing young man. And yet, on the outside of the jail, he had been caught up in the gang stuff, in drug dealing, in all sorts of craziness. But there was just something about him that I grew to care about. And when I found out what he had done, which is how he ended up getting 25 years, even though he was still 16, it didn't change the fact that I still saw in him goodness and that I still loved him as a little brother and wanted good things for him. Despite the fact that a lot of people that are inside, right, would own the fact that they have done things that they're not proud of, or in this particular case, Neco did some things that I would feel were relatively abhorrent. I don't like what he was about, and yet I saw this amazing goodness in him, and I cared deeply about him. I learned to care about him before I even knew, and when I found out what he had done, I didn't change the fact that I loved him. And I think that, I don't always do it perfectly, but I think that's what the gospel calls us to do. My advice to people who are looking for that goodness, and I think this goes to the Faith Behind Bars class. We had some guests in class last night that shared their stories, and you meet people and you hear what they're about and who they really are underneath all the craziness, and you learn to care about them. You see the humanity, you see the dignity, you see the potential, and you embrace the dignity that they just can't lose. It's not possible to lose it, at least according to Christian teaching, right? And so when we build relationships with people, we find that out about them. We learn the grace that has touched their lives, the relationships that make them amazing despite what they've been about. And I feel compelled here, because I've been focusing entirely on finding the dignity of people inside, to mention that we can never forget that behind the abhorrent act is a victim, and families of both the victims and the perpetrators. And if we're going to find any path forward toward healing and a better way to deal with people who make horrible choices, then we're going to have to recognize the humanity in all of them and reclaim their voices and reclaim the dignity of each one, so that they can be a part of the solutions for their own survival and thriving moving forward. This ministry has touched me extraordinarily. I had a supportive department chair who said, well, let's give it a try. So we have something in theology that's called special topics, and you can, kind of give something a trial run. And immediately, students were really attracted because I think it was this sort of misrepresented reality on media, and maybe people understood that or just were fascinated by people who were caught up in the life. And I felt like I had something to bring to that conversation. And I felt like I could share with students that I cared deeply about some amazing qualities in prisoners that I care about, and bring those two together so that there was a learning between those two communities. And the first semester was extraordinarily successful. Like, people really felt transformed by it, I think, or at least that's how they shared that with me. And every time I've offered it, it's filled up right away. And I just think that people are drawn to being made aware of the realities of people they don't usually get to meet. And I think that's a really important conversation to have. If I can boil down the life lessons to just a few, I would say that when people read the letters, the first letters they had from the guys inside, and said to me, I just realized they're human beings. That to me is extraordinarily important, because the media paints people that are locked up as animals, monsters, and I mean, you can even see that like on newspapers. They'll label people like menaces to society. And I've met hundreds of these people at this point in my life. And I can assure you, while I disagree vehemently with a lot of things they've done, they're none of those things. They're human beings with gifts. Some of them are amazing, like artists and musicians, and really brilliant. And a couple of them, that I know have written books. And, these are people that once they wake up to what they've been about, want to be a contributor to society. So when my students leave class, I'm hoping they walk away recognizing the human dignity in everyone, no matter what thing they have done in their life. And secondly, that they might feel compelled to do something about it. There are a lot of injustices in the system. I'm doing my best to bring those to light in class. I'm hoping my students walk away saying, you know what? As a journalist, I want to, bring some other light on something that is so distorted by other forms of media. Or I might, when I'm a police officer, I might want to work with young people and see if I can keep them from getting into the cycle of crime. I'm hoping I can inspire people to be a part of the solution. I actually, as far as writing a book, I am in conversation with a publisher right now about turning the Faith Behind Bars class into a book, because I think it's been mentioned to me that you're one of the few people that could teach this class because you had the jail ministry experience and you are teaching in a higher education. But I think I could frame it in such a way where I could break down some of the themes I unfold with the students, teach people how I logistically do the correspondence project, talk about the importance of hearing actual stories in the classroom. And I'm very much hoping, right now I'm working on a sample chapter so that the publisher can decide whether they think I'm the right one for the job. And I really feel like, I think they're pretty excited about the project too, and recognize its uniqueness. And I'm very hopeful. And in the book, I'm hoping to bring in prisoner voices in each chapter. And then someone suggested, actually the publisher suggested, inviting student voices. What part of this conversation was transformative for you, and letting that really give some texture to each chapter of the book. So I'm hopeful. Thank you so much for joining me on Lewis Spotlight. I hope that something that I have shared from my life lessons will be inspiring for you to make a difference wherever you end up serving.